Well, it looks like Pennywise has floated over to TV. What is up, guys? Welcome to my first impressions review of the new HBO Max series, It, Welcome to Derry. This is functioning as a prequel to the two most recent It films set in the 1960s, when presumably Pennywise was doing his early biddings on the town of Derry. So this was a TV series that I remember being announced quite a while ago, but I think because of the writer's strikes, it was delayed a bit. So here we are at the tail end of 2025, finally diving back into Stephen King's world of Derry. And this is a show that I've always been curious about, but I have to be honest, I was a bit skeptical of for a number of reasons. Now, if you've seen my reviews of all the It movies, I'm a massive fan of the It 1990 miniseries. It's got a plethora of flaws that I absolutely acknowledge, but it was very important and formative for me in my early years, and so I kind of love it for all of its flaws. And I was a huge fan of the first It film, which I guess now is titled It Chapter 1 in hindsight. Thought that was a great movie, just didn't love the amount of CGI that was in it. It Chapter 2, however, was a massive disappointment for me. I am not a fan of that movie, much like how I'm not a huge fan of the second half of the story or even the It 1990 miniseries, but I feel like they had so much opportunity to do a much better version of that, learn from the mistakes that even the novel is criticized for, and they just kind of fell into the same traps of that stupid-ass spider. Nonetheless, I was definitely interested in and more cautiously optimistic on the show being able to go back to the 60s, because that was an element that I loved in the 1990 miniseries that they kind of advanced forward into the 80s, which I also loved in the movies. But I like that period piece, old school time period feel, especially with the backdrop of Pennywise and everything like that. So that side of the show I was very curious about, I was sold on, but you guys know that have watched me for a while, I don't tend to like prequels, more specifically horror prequels. A lot of times they fall into the traps of trying to answer too much. Typically, I don't even like the answers that were given. Sometimes I think not having an answer is more valuable than giving me a definitive origin for things. So that side of it, as well as knowing that because Andy Muschietti is going to be really spearheading this thing, that we're probably still going to have a ton of CGI. Those were my worries walking into this, but I watched the first episode when it aired, and I've actually seen the second episode as well. I initially got screeners for all 5 episodes. It was then reduced to 2 because I think they were still finishing them, but I've seen a quarter of the entire series. I'm going to talk specifically about my first impressions on the first episode, no spoilers for episode 2, other than to just kind of color out some of my speculation on the future on things that I'm nervous about, things that I'm definitely enjoying as far as the approach of the show. But overall, I'll say, so far, I'm digging it. So starting off with the things that I've enjoyed thus far with It Welcome to Derry, the show is certainly not pulling any punches. The fact that you go to HBO Max, even though this was a theatrically released rated R film series, it seems like they're trying to go even further with the gore, with the death, with the shock value, certainly. And I think that that's a good move. I think that that's something that maybe some people were a little bit worried about. If you're going to go to a TV format, are you going to start softening the evil of Pennywise? Are we going to start softening all of the weird, creepy edges of this story in this world? And I think within the first 10 or 15 minutes of this series, they pretty much definitively say, nope, we're going to go a little further. I mean, when you got images of a demonic bat baby being birthed out of a woman's crotch to kind of introduce you to the show's tone, that's certainly a way to make a statement and make a first impression. And with the gore that we've gotten so far, while there is a lot of CGI blood at play, I think that there's enough like moving camera work and a lot more fantastical stuff, as well as the lighting choices, keeping certain things in the dark, that is making at least the CGI gore tolerable for me. And I like the fact that very early on with this series, they're putting you in a spot where you kind of are in that state of mind of, I don't know who's going to survive. I don't know if all these characters are going to die. I don't know if all of them are going to survive to the end. But the fact that I'm not secure in thinking, oh, yeah, these guys are safe to the end, we can't kill kids. The fact that that safety blanket is gone, I like that. That's something that it makes the show certainly an intriguing thing to watch because you don't know what is around every corner, especially in regard to the vitality of these children. Something that might be kind of an unpopular take is that I actually like the fact that we're having this slow build to Pennywise. I remember a lot of people, whenever they were dropping reports saying that, Skarsgård and Pennywise were not going to be super prominent in this series, a lot of people were upset for understandable reasons. Pennywise is the horror icon of this series, obviously, so people want to see more of him. But I actually like the fact, and I'm intrigued at the fact that the show is building out the other pieces of Pennywise, because, Pennywise we know predominantly as the clown image, but Pennywise is this cosmic shape-shifting being. And so we've seen a lot of different entities that he's played within the miniseries and the movies, but this one is really feeling like each episode is kind of going to take out one or two different little forms of Pennywise. We've seen the little demonic baby in this first one. There's a couple more that you'll see in episode 2, and I'm sure all the way through to the end of the series, we're going to color out all these different versions of what these kids and these main characters' true fears are. And I would imagine we probably won't see a whole lot of Pennywise until maybe the last 2 or 3 episodes of the show, and I'm actually fine with that. I love Skarsgård. I love what he does as the clown. I'm much more of a fan of Tim Curry personally, but I love it. But I really do like the fact that we're getting different angles, different things to see here, and different things to kind of become potentially really iconic, grisly, monstrous images inside of this show, besides just the clown and the balloons over and over again. Really quick before we move on with the rest of this review, while Pennywise fuels his body with the fear of children, those of us that are human have to take other means. So check out the sponsor of today's video, Huel. As some of you know, I've recently ramped up a lot of my fitness goals this summer, and I'm trying to lose fat without losing my lean muscle mass. And so in order to do that, I have to highly prioritize protein in my diet. And that's a difficult goal to meet sometimes without constant meal prep or accidentally neglecting other essential things in my diet. Well, with Huel's Black Edition powder, I'm able to quickly and easily get in a 400-calorie meal that has 40 grams of protein per serving. You just add water and 2 scoops of the powder to a shaker and then shake to mix. There's no cool way to do this. I normally reach for Huel when I'm editing because it has B12 vitamins that keep me energized, and for a 400-calorie meal, it's surprisingly filling. Huel Black Edition powder comes in a variety of flavors, with vanilla being my current preference, which I guess makes me what the kids call basic AF. And the best part is, when all is said and done, each meal totals out to cost you about $2.65, which anywhere you go nowadays, what does that get you? Ketchup packet? A napkin? And if you're somebody who struggles to get in the daily recommended amount of greens, which, let's be honest, is all of us, Huel just launched their Daily Greens Ready to Drink, which is a great option for those of us that don't like the taste or texture of the greens powder and would much prefer a cold, crisp, sparkling drink. I've tried all 3 flavors that they have available, and my preference is the peach flavor. Huel Daily Greens RTD was developed by registered nutritionists and dietitians, has 42 vitamins, minerals, and superfoods, and contains 4 grams of fiber with only 1 gram of sugar, all in a drink that is only 25 calories. So if you're ready to get some Huel in your life, click the link in the video description below or scan the QR code on screen and use code LEACH15 to get 15% off Huel's newest and existing products. And thank you so much to Huel for sponsoring today's video. Something that I walked into this show expecting to like, and thus far I do really like, is the 60s time period. I think that there's something simplistic and kind of peaceful about that time period before technology really took over, and even things like video games, and of course beyond that, social media. There's just something simplistic and appealing about the lives, especially of children back in those days, where they would just read and they would throw rocks and they would ride their bikes and they would go to the cinema and eat popcorn and stuff like that. There was just something about that that is really appealing to me, where I would almost want to time travel back to that. But I also think, especially for the concept of this show, it's a great place to have a horror setting, because it takes away all of the safety blankets of modern technology, and it takes away a lot of the trappings that a lot of scripts fall into with the conveniences of modern technology. And why don't you do this? And why don't you go this place? Well, back in the 60s, they didn't have that option. So I like the fact that we have that as the setting for this monstrous being. There's no way to truly call for help or get the word out or get any kind of an indication that the weirdness of Derry is not something that's spread everywhere else. But also, I just like the look. I like the look of the towns and the soda shops and the cars and the costume design and the set design. I think all that's done really well. There's certainly some green screen at play here and there, and you can kind of tell. But I think thus far they're doing a really good job at capturing this time period and visualizing this time period. And I really look forward to seeing what ways they're going to kind of flip certain elements of the 60s on their head and give us a very terrifying version of it as the show goes on. Kind of going along with that, I think so far the show is shot very well. Andy Muschietti is directing a number of these episodes, maybe even all of them for all I know. All I saw was the first 4 episodes. He is the director. And so it's cool not only just for like a visual through line to make sure that the show at least matches mostly with the tone and the visuals and the look of his movies, given that this is supposed to be the same universe, the same Pennywise, the same characters linking up. I think that's very important. But I also think that just the look and the visuals of the show from a color standpoint is a lot darker in the show than the movies seem to be. There's a lot more reds at play. You know, the whole scene inside of the movie theater at the end of the first episode is kind of painted in red while that demon baby's flying around this old cinema and, you know, pulling kids out of their seats and stuff. Like, I just love the look of it. It's a meaner look than I think the movies went for. And so I'm curious how that look is going to develop, especially for episodes that maybe Andy is not directing. But, you know, whoever they got to do the for the director of photography and the people that are making all the lighting choices, I think they're just doing a really good job at bringing the town of Derry to life and coloring out the world of it in a much more expansive way so far. And the last thing that I'm going to put here in the positive is really the only positive that I think has the potential to move down into the other categories very easily, depending on how they execute it. But I like the fact that we're starting to get a little bit of that Stephen King shared universe element in here with the character of Dick Halloran. Now, 2 episodes in, I'm still not 100% sure what his function in the show is, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on in this video. But I do like the fact that we're starting to incorporate pieces of these other Stephen King stories like The Shining. I think there's always been, inside of the novels, from what I understand, there is a bit of that shared universe element, but we've never really seen that brought to the movies or any kind of TV series in a way that feels as solid as what they've done so far here. And I don't know if there's plans to do anything with that. I don't know if eventually, if this really succeeds, depending on what rights they hold, if WB and HBO Max plan on doing TV series with Pet Sematary or The Shining or, you know, Langoliers or any of that stuff. But I like the potential there. And I think that if they do find a way to work that out in the rights, and they do find a way to have an overall world where they can have all these different expansive novels turned into TV series that are all interconnected very loosely with characters, I think that could be a hell of a gold mine for not only Stephen King fans, but of course, WB. Stephen King, he sells, baby. Moving on to the mixed of It Welcome to Derry, and this one is a pretty hilarious asterisk. So one of my mixed elements so far is the kids, the characters, the whole kid side of the storyline so far. For a couple different reasons. I do think that some of the kid actors so far have been a little bit rough. I think some of the writing for the kids feels a little bit conventional, not really necessarily leaning on caricatures as much, but just very traditional written kids. You got the nerdy kid, you got the one that says the wrong thing, you know, almost trying to pick up on some of the personalities of the Losers Club, but not doing nearly as good of a job with it. And I actually found myself struggling a little bit in the first half of this episode with a number of the characters that we were spending time with. Like, I just didn't really care for a lot of them. Now, that's kind of rectified by the end of this episode when the characters that predominantly I did not like end up being torn the fuck apart by Pennywise. So, yeah, that was kind of a little bit of an extra sick element for me to enjoy at the end. Was like, oh, good, cool. They're out of the fucking picture. Take them off the chessboard. Good job, clown. But, you know, 2 episodes in, I'm still not 100% sold on the kids that are even remaining after the end of the first episode. Now, I think there's potential here. They're obviously doing a lot more of a slow build storyline than you have for the runtime of a film, and I understand that, but still some of the same issues going on where I'm just not really engaging with them near as much as I did the characters from any of the movies. You know, they're not quite the Losers Club yet. And so there's a lot of potential for them to go up, you know, as the story continues, as these characters develop, especially the 2 characters that were surviving at the end of the movie theater. You know, one of them is somebody who has like this past with a reputation of her father and spent some time in a mental institution, and that kind of lingers over her personality, as well as this young girl who's helping her father manage this movie theater. I think they have a really nice dynamic, and I'm curious to see what happens to that throughout the storyline. But the other characters that we've seen inside of their school that are clearly going to become more regular characters as the show goes on, not quite as sold on them. So we'll see. It's kind of a disappointment to have a storyline within the It universe where I'm not completely sold on the kids, because that's like 50% of the charm of the world of It. The other half is Pennywise. The other thing that I'm not completely sold on is the very deliberate attempts at shock value that the show is going for. Now, obviously, the first episode, you have the opening with the birth of this baby, as well as the end of the episode where characters you assume are going to be your lead characters end up getting killed in hour one. But there's even some elements in the second episode where they continue to use some of this just to have these really shocking, kind of gross images. And while I think that there's a good side to that in really embracing the horror of this, I think that it helps it stand out a little bit among other storylines, shows, movies where you're watching a group of kids go after evil that has certainly been repopularized by things like Stranger Things. I think going for the shock value makes it deliberately more mean and stand out for specifically horror fans more so than all ages somewhat, and I think that that's cool. But I also feel like it's a little cheap if you keep doing it. So we'll see. Another one that has a big asterisk, which is why these two are pretty definitively my mixed things, because they could go easily up or down as the show goes on. But I just hope it's not that every single thing that stands out about each of these 8 episodes is, oh, you remember that gross image? Oh, you remember that thing shooting out of that woman's crotch? Like, I want something more. I want something genuinely unnerving and like shocking in a terrifying way, not shocking in like a gross off-putting way. And now moving on to the negatives. And as I said before, these could move up or down. You know, these first impressions reviews, or even just individual episode reviews, are always tricky because you're forced to give a complete definitive opinion on something that is quite literally incomplete. But it's the nature of the beast. So far, 2 hours in, I'm not really sold on this military storyline. Basically, all the adult storyline. Now, the weird thing about that is that I think that the actors and the writing in regard to the adult storyline and everything going on in this military base, I find it to be a lot more engaging than what's going on with the kids thus far, but it just feels so detached. I don't really know what the through line is that's tying in the kids storyline with this military storyline, aside from just giving us our place to introduce the Dick Halloran character, and hopefully they really pay that off and merit having such a focus on these other characters and not all the kids. But 2 episodes in, I don't really see where they're heading towards the same destination yet. And I think that that's a little bit of a writing issue. You know, you should be able to watch the pilot of the show, and no matter how detached certain characters and storylines are, you understand how they're all going to converge. You understand how they're all under the same umbrella of this storyline that they're telling. And I just don't feel that with this yet. It very much feels almost like 2 different shows set within the same world. Something that I feared would be an issue for me, but luckily it's not near as bad as I expected, is the overabundance of CGI. Now, I understand with the nature of the Pennywise character, there's a lot of fantastical, otherworldly things going on. But I just am one of those people that always feels like practical effects and practical suits and practical monster designs, all that stuff just functions so much better. And it's kind of a recurring theme with literally everything that Andy Muschietti has done, that he just doesn't really do all that well with CGI. I don't know if he just chooses the same CGI artists. I don't know if he deliberately tells them to kind of have this uncanny valley thing in there because that's how he interprets the Pennywise character. Honestly, I don't know. He's not the one creating these effects, but he's the one, you know, approving the people who are doing them and approving the effects to be in the final cut. And everything that he's ever done, that's been a negative for me. From Mama all the way to The Flash being possibly the worst example. And, you know, I will say what he has done so far, what he has brought as far as CGI effects in the first 2 episodes of It Welcome to Derry, It's the least offensive CGI that I've ever seen from his work, so we're moving in a good direction, but it's still very much an uncanny valley. You know, there's very much, you're looking at creatures and effects that you know are not there. You know, you're looking at a graphic. And that's one of the reasons why I've always loved the It 1990 miniseries. Despite all of its flaws, everything that Tim Curry had to bring to his version was practical. It was all in his facial expressions. It was all in the practical fangs and his body movements and his mannerisms. And even in some of the creatures that they had, like the mummy and the dog coming out and everything like that, it was all done for real. And there's just something more valuable about that to me than what they did with the most recent movies where, you know, Pennywise is just like this giant PS2 graphic throughout half of the film. So if you're somebody that was hoping they were going to get rid of that, they don't. But it is a little bit better. And the last thing that I'll say here in the negatives is entirely speculative. It's not really anything that I've seen on screen yet. But there's certain things that are hinted at by episode 2 for where the military storyline might be heading that to me feels like it's going to be heading more in let's explain the origins of Pennywise type direction. And as I said in the beginning, that was one of the things that I was skeptical of in this show is, are we going to just go back and show a different time period where Pennywise is laying waste to a town, or are we going to try to explain shit? Because if we're going to try to explain shit, you have a very high probability of losing me by the end of it. So the fact that I'm already kind of starting to get a little bit of a scent of that is bothering me. You know, not to say that they couldn't give me some things that I really enjoy. They could. This could end up being something that's not a negative by the end of the show. But the track record for me specifically, just the way that I experience prequels, my track record's not good. So I think that the mystery of Pennywise and the mystery of his origins and all of the unclear details that you have to make up in your head, I think all of that is much more appealing than potentially an 8-episode miniseries giving me some definitive answer for why this monstrous demonic clown is inside of this town in Maine. So we'll see. That is the biggest tipping point for me of what might make or break this show. But overall, guys, so far, I'm enjoying it. I'm certainly invested to check out the rest of the show. By the time episode 8 airs, I will certainly do a full season review. I don't know if maybe I'll do short reactions. We'll see. I'm not promising anything, but for sure, at the end of the show, I'll give you a full review with what I think about the full product. But if you're an It fan, definitely worth checking out so far. It's intriguing. They're pulling no punches. And if you love Pennywise, you might have to be patient for it, but I have every bit of faith that when we do finally see him, he's going to make an impact. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for my review of the It 1990 miniseries, or up here for my review of the It Chapter 1 film. Please like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.